The morning Caleb Morrow put the advertisement in the county paper, the frost had already killed 2 rows of winter wheat, and the bank had sent its third letter in as many months. He wrote the notice himself, standing at the kitchen table in his coat because the stove had gone cold and he had not bothered to light it. He chose his words the way he chose fence posts, for function, not for beauty. Rancher 34 seeks capable woman for marriage, property in good standing. Honest man, will provide. He folded the paper once, walked it to town himself, and said nothing about it to anyone, not even to his neighbor Walt Greer, who would have had plenty to say. He had not planned to marry this way. He had not planned most of what his life had become. 3 years before, his father had died, leaving the ranch to him alongside a debt Caleb had not known existed. A number written in ink that looked almost reasonable until you placed it beside the actual figures of what the land produced. His father had borrowed against the cattle, against the east pasture, against the water rights on the creek that ran through the property's lower third. The ranch was real and solid and beautiful in its way. 540 acres of high country grassland with a creek and a windbreak and a barn that had stood since his grandfather built it. But it was also quietly and persistently drowning. Caleb had spent 3 years trying to bail it out with his bare hands. He needed a harvest hand, a bookkeeper, a steady second presence, and he had not the money to hire any of them. What he had was land and a house with a room he had not opened since his mother passed, and the stubborn conviction that he was not yet finished. He told himself the advertisement was practical. He told himself he was not lonely. He was almost convincing, if you found this story, stay until the end. It goes somewhere worth reaching. The letters came over the following 3 weeks, 12 in total. He read them all at the kitchen table after supper in the order they arrived. Most were polite, 2 were not. One woman wrote 4 pages about her late husband's garden, which Caleb respected but could not use. He set each letter on the stack and went to bed with the problem still unsettled. The last letter was different. It arrived on a Tuesday in an envelope with no decorative border, addressed in handwriting that was precise without being ornate. The letter was 1 page both sides. The woman's name was Nora Callahan. She was 31, a farmer's daughter from a dry county town 3 days east by rail. She wrote that she could drive a team, read a ledger, cure pork, and identify 14 species of grass by root alone. She wrote that she was direct by nature and that some people found this difficult. She wrote that she was not looking for sentiment, but she was looking for something real. She asked 2 questions at the bottom of the page. What was the condition of the land, and did he intend to keep it or sell it? She did not ask about his temperament or his appearance or his prospects for happiness. She asked about the land. He wrote back the same evening. The land is in debt but not in ruin. I intend to keep it. He signed it with his name and the county and nothing else. She arrived on a Friday in October, stepping off the afternoon rail with 1 trunk, a canvas bag worn at both handles, and the unhurried posture of someone who had decided something and was following through on it. Caleb stood on the platform in his good shirt with his hat in his hands, and he watched her walk toward him with the practical stride of a woman who had not come to be impressed. She was not what he had imagined, though he could not have said clearly what he had imagined. She was medium height and lean, with dark hair pulled back under a gray traveling hat, and eyes that were the particular shade of brown that looks almost amber in certain light. She studied him the way she might study a fence line, not unkindly, but without pretense. "Mr. Morrow," she said. "Miss Callahan." They shook hands. Her grip was firm and brief, the handshake of someone who had been working since childhood. "How far is the ranch?" she asked. "Hour and a half by wagon." She nodded and turned to see that her trunk was unloaded. He helped her with it. They said very little on the road home. The sky was wide and the light was already going gold at the edges, and the hills rolled out on either side with that particular autumn stillness that always made Caleb feel both small and steady. He glanced at her once. She was watching the land, Not the sky, not the road, the land itself, the grasses and the drainage patterns and the way the slope fell away toward the creek bottom. He did not say anything, but he noticed. The house was cold when they arrived. He had laid a fire but not lit it yet, and he could see her take in the kitchen in one efficient scan: the stove, the shelves, the table, the window facing east, the ledger he had left open and not thought to close. She did not comment on any of it. He showed her the room, which was clean and plain with a quilt his mother had made and a window that looked toward the barn. She set her canvas bag on the floor and her trunk at the foot of the bed and turned around. "I'll want to see the books after supper," she said. He had been prepared for many things, he had not been prepared for that. "All right," he said. They ate a simple meal that he had made himself, beans and cornbread and the last of the week's coffee, and she ate without comment or complaint, and when the plates were cleared, she sat down at the table and opened the ledger and began to read. He sat across from her and answered questions when she asked them. She asked about the bank debt. She asked about the crop yields by year. She asked about the cattle count and the cost of winter feed and the water rights on the lower creek. He answered all of it plainly, holding nothing back, because there was no point in concealing a wound from a person you were asking to help you heal it. An hour passed. 2. The fire had taken hold and the kitchen was warm, and the only sounds were the occasional pop of the wood and the scratch of her pencil and the wind against the windows. Finally, she looked up. "You're not as far gone as you think," she said. He looked at her. "How do you figure that?" She turned the ledger and showed him a column she had penciled out. "You've been paying the interest instead of restructuring the principal. And you've been selling cattle in the fall when the price is low. If you hold the spring calves and sell in summer, and if you plant the east pasture in rye instead of leaving it fallow, you can cover the third quarter payment without borrowing again." She paused. "It's not easy, but it's possible." He studied the numbers she had written. They were clean and deliberate and correct. "My father did it the same way every year," he said, meaning the fall selling, the fallow pasture, the repetition of the same choices. "I know," she said. "I can see it in the ledger." He didn't ask how she knew how to read a ledger like that, not that evening. He was still processing the quiet shock of someone looking at his failing ranch and seeing, without sympathy and without dismissal, a path through it. He had not expected that. He had expected someone to share the burden. He had not expected someone who could read the shape of it and say, "Here is the door." They were married 3 weeks later at the county courthouse, with Walt Greer as witness and Walt's wife Delphine standing beside Nora in her everyday coat because Nora had no other. Walt shook Caleb's hand afterward and said in his plain way, "She seems sensible." Delphine hugged Nora and whispered something Caleb couldn't hear. Nora almost smiled, not quite, but almost. The first winter was a season of work which suited them both. They rose before light and divided the tasks without discussion, falling into a rhythm the way two people in a small space will, not from intimacy but from practicality, from the understanding that the same things needed doing every day and that two sets of hands were better than one. Nora took the books and the accounts and the correspondence with the bank. Caleb took the cattle, the fences, the equipment, the 100 small emergencies a working ranch produces each week. They met at meals and in the evenings by the fire, and they talked about the ranch because that was what there was to talk about. And in talking about the ranch they were, without naming it, talking about everything. She was not easy to know. That was the plain truth of it. She answered questions fully and asked them sharply and had no patience for vagueness or waste. And she could go an entire evening in silence without it appearing to trouble her, which troubled him more than he admitted. He was not a man who needed constant conversation, but there is a particular quality to shared silence that tells you something about the other person, whether they are at ease or merely closed, and with Nora he could not yet tell. He watched her instead. He watched the way she worked, which was without hurry but without wasted motion, every action deliberate and considered. He watched the way she handled the animals, which was firm and quiet, the way of someone who had grown up around livestock and understood that they could feel uncertainty in a human hand. He watched the way she read not just the ledger but the books on the shelf which she worked through in the evenings, one at a time, setting each one back exactly where she had found it. She noticed things: a gate left open, a water trough beginning to scale, a heifer that was moving wrong in the south pasture 3 days before Caleb had spotted it himself. She said these things without fanfare, the way you'd report a weather change. By February, he trusted her judgment entirely. He was not yet sure he knew her. The two things were not the same. There was one thing he had noticed, though he had not spoken of it. Nora received mail from the East. Not often, perhaps once a month, sometimes less, but when a letter arrived from that direction, she would take it to her room before opening it, and she would come to supper afterward with a quality to her face that he recognized as the effort of composure. He said nothing. He told himself it was not his business. He told himself she was entitled to a life before the ranch that she had not shared with him, just as he had not shared every corner of his own. But the letters continued, and the composure continued, and the small closed door in her expression continued, and he left it alone the way you leave a fence post that seems sound, even when you can see a hairline crack at the base. The spring came with the particular force of high country springs. Sudden and complete, the snow pulling back from the south-facing slopes first, the creek running high and loud, the grass coming up green so fast it looked almost urgent. They planted the east pasture in rye as Nora had planned, both of them working the seed drill together, one guiding the horses and one managing the feed line. It was hard work and slow work, and neither of them spoke much while doing it. But there was something in the shared effort, the same cold wind, the same aching backs, the same rows stretching out behind them, that felt like the beginning of something Caleb did not yet have a word for. That evening she was quiet in a different way than usual. Not the closed-door quiet, but something more tired. He put 2 cups of coffee on the table and sat down across from her, and she looked at the cup for a moment before picking it up. "You've never asked me why I answered the advertisement," she said. He looked at her. "I figured you'd tell me when you wanted to." She set the cup down. "Most men would have asked by now." "I'm not most men," she almost smiled. Not quite. He was learning to read the difference. "No," she said, "you're not." She was quiet for a moment. "I had a farm, my family's farm. After my father died, it went to his brother rather than to me. That's how it was written. I managed it for 6 years after my father took sick and could no longer work it, but it was never legally mine." She said this without bitterness, in the same tone she used to describe the weather. "I needed land that was mine to stand on." He thought about that. "This land is yours," he said, "as much as it's mine." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said, "that's why I stayed." He did not say anything to that because there was nothing to say that would improve it. He picked up his coffee and they sat by the fire until it was only coals, and if it was not love yet, it was something built from the same materials, and it was solid. The letter that changed everything arrived in late June, on a day when the rye in the east pasture was standing waist-high, and the cattle were fat on the new grass, and the summer had the quality of a breath held in expectation. It came from the east like the others, but the envelope was larger. Nora took it to her room. She did not come down for supper. Caleb fed himself and left a plate covered on the stove and went out to check the cattle and came back in the dark to find the plate untouched and her room still closed. He knocked on her door. A pause. "I'm all right," she said. "There's food on the stove." Another pause. "Thank you." He went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time before he slept, and what he thought about was not the letter or the secret or whatever was written in it, but the fact that she had said "I'm all right" in the tone people use when they mean the opposite, and that he had no right yet to push past that door, and that it mattered to him more than he had been prepared for. In the morning, she was at the table when he came down, the ledger open, the coffee already made. She looked tired but composed. She did not speak first. He poured his coffee and sat down. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "But if it concerns the ranch, I'd want to know." She looked at him across the table. Something shifted in her face, not breaking, but opening slightly, the way a door that has been stuck will shift when the weather changes. "It concerns the ranch," she said. She told him then. The story came out in her plain, direct way without dramatics, which somehow made it harder to hear. Her father's brother, the man who had inherited the family farm, had died in the spring without a will, and the farm had passed to a cousin, a man named Gerald Foss, who had no interest in farming but every interest in liquidating. Foss had found in the estate papers a document that Nora's father had signed 20 years prior, a promissory agreement with a business partner, a man who had loaned him money during a hard season. The debt had been paid, Nora's father had believed, but the cancellation had never been properly recorded. And now Foss, or rather Foss's attorney, was claiming that the debt had transferred with the estate and that as Nora was her father's only surviving heir of record, and now a property owner by marriage, the claim could be brought against the ranch. It was not a certain claim, it might not hold, but it was a document with her father's signature on it, and Foss had an attorney, and the figure cited was enough to finish what the bank had started. Caleb was quiet for a long time after she finished. "How long have you known?" he said. "The first letter came in December," she said. "I thought it would resolve. I was trying to resolve it myself." She paused. "I didn't want to bring a debt into your house when I had come here to help manage one." He stood up and walked to the window and stood there looking out at the east pasture where the rye was moving in a light wind. He thought about what it would mean if the claims succeeded. He thought about 3 years of rebuilding, the plan that was finally working, the spring calves ready to sell, the rye that was going to make the third quarter payment without borrowing. He thought about the woman sitting at his table who had spent 6 months carrying this alone, trying to protect the ranch while also being the best thing that had happened to the ranch. He turned around. "You should have told me sooner," he said. He said it without anger, just plainly. "Yes," she said, "I should have. Do you have the letters?" She brought them, all 6. She set them on the table in front of him in order, and he sat down and read every one. When he was done, he looked up. "This cancellation, your father believed the debt was paid. He paid it. I was 12, but I remember the day. He came home with a receipt. He kept it in a tin box in the top of the wardrobe." She paused. "The box was in the farm when it transferred to my uncle. I don't know what became of it." Caleb thought for a moment. "Who was the business partner, the man who loaned the money?" She gave the name. Caleb wrote it on the back of an envelope. "All right," he said. "All right what? I'm going to find out if that receipt still exists." He folded the envelope and put it in his shirt pocket. "And if it doesn't, I'm going to find out what other record there might be." She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not gratitude exactly. She was not a woman given to displaying gratitude openly, but something quieter than that. Recognition, the look of someone who has spent a long time carrying a loan and has just discovered they do not have to. "I didn't marry you to bring you trouble," she said. "No," he said. "You married me because you could see a path through my trouble." This is just the same in the other direction. He left 2 days later on the eastbound rail, with the letters in his inside pocket and Walt Greer's son watching the cattle in his absence. It was the first time he had left the ranch in over a year. He sat in the rail car watching the land change from high grassland to lower country, and he thought about Nora at the kitchen table with the ledger, and the rye standing in the east pasture, and the particular sound the house made in the morning when she was already in it. He thought about what the ranch had been when he was alone in it, and what it had become, and the distance between those two things. He was gone 9 days. He found the business partner's widow in a town 2 days east, a small brisk woman in her 70s who kept everything her husband had ever touched in cardboard boxes in the back room, organized by year, because she had always believed that a man's financial records told the true story of his character. She found the receipt in 40 minutes. Caleb sat at her kitchen table while she did, drinking the worst coffee he had ever tasted and saying nothing, and when she placed the paper in front of him, A faded receipt dated 20 years prior, signed by both parties with the sum marked paid in full. He sat very still for a moment and then said carefully, "Ma'am, may I take this with me?" She let him make a copy. She kept the original but agreed to file a sworn statement with the county clerk supporting the copy's validity. Her attorney, a young man who arrived at the house within 2 hours, drew up the document that afternoon. Caleb paid the fee with what remained of the money he had set aside for winter supplies and felt entirely satisfied with the expenditure. He was back on a Friday. Nora was in the garden when the wagon came up the road, pulling weeds with that focused, unhurried motion he had come to recognize as her thinking posture. She straightened when she saw him. He climbed down and walked across the yard and held out the document. She read it. Then she read it again. Then she held it with both hands for a moment, looking at it, and she did the thing she almost never did. Her face moved. Not into tears, she was not a woman for tears, or not yet, but into something open and unguarded that he had not seen before. "Where did you find it?" she said. He told her. She listened to the whole of it, the widow, the cardboard boxes, the worst coffee in the territory, the young attorney. And somewhere in the telling, she almost smiled, and this time she let it. It was a small smile, not decorative, just true. "The worst coffee in the territory," she repeated. "Without question," he said. Walt Greer came by that afternoon, as he always seemed to, with the particular instinct of the rural neighbor for arriving during consequential moments. He sat on the porch with a cup of Nora's considerably better coffee and listened to the summary version of events, and when it was done he said, "Well, lucky you married a woman worth going to get." He glanced at Caleb, or unlucky depending on the coffee. Nora looked at Walt with an expression that was not quite warmth but had warmth somewhere in its direction. "Thank you, Walt. Just sayin' what I see," he said. They sent Foss's attorney the notarized copy along with a letter from their own attorney, a man in town who owed Caleb a favor from a fence dispute 3 years prior. The response came within 2 weeks. The claim was withdrawn. The document was filed, the matter closed, and the ranch remained exactly what it had been building toward being: solid, improving, and still standing. What shifted between them after that was not sudden. It was the kind of change that you can only see from a certain distance, the way you can only see a season change when it is already over. There were no declarations. There was no evening where something announced itself clearly. There was only the gradual deepening of ordinary things, the way she handed him his coffee without looking up from the ledger, already knowing how he took it. The way he started lighting the stove before she came down in the morning, not because it was his task, but because it mattered that she not come into a cold kitchen. The way they walked the fence line together in the evenings, not to inspect it, just to walk, and talked about nothing important and everything real. Summer ended. The rye came in full and strong, the best east pasture yield the ranch had seen in years, and the spring calves sold in August at a price that covered the third quarter payment and left enough remaining to repair the barn roof before winter. Nora worked the numbers after the sale and came to supper with an expression that was as close to satisfied as she allowed herself, which was different from happy but not far from it. "We're going to make it," she said. He had been thinking it for months, but hearing it from her, from the person who had looked at the books and seen what was actually true rather than what he had hoped, made it different. He looked across the table at her. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I didn't believe that when I first came here," she said. "I thought I could help, but I didn't know." She paused. "I know now." He thought about the woman who had stepped off the rail in October with a canvas bag and a direct question about the land. He thought about how he had been braced for disappointment in every direction, braced for someone who would endure the ranch without understanding it, or someone who would judge the debt and find him wanting. He thought about the thing he had written in his letter, "The land is in debt but not in ruin," and how it had turned out to be true of more than the land. "Nora," he said. She looked at him. It was not a speech. He was not a man for speeches, and she would not have wanted one. He said simply, "I'm glad you answered." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the late summer wind was moving across the pasture in a long, slow wave. "So am I," she said. The autumn that year was clear and long, the kind of autumn the high country produces once in several years, warm in the days and cold in the nights. The air clean enough to see all the way to the ridgeline, the grass going gold in slow stages. They worked the cattle and mended the last of the fences and stacked the firewood and made the small thousand preparations that winter requires, and none of it felt like hardship. It felt like what a life is when it is going in the right direction. On an evening in late October, almost exactly a year from the day she had arrived, Caleb came in from the barn to find her at the kitchen table where he had found her so many times, the ledger open, the coffee cooling beside her. But she was not writing, she was looking at something on the table. He came closer and saw that it was his original letter to her, the one she had asked questions in, the one he had answered with 2 sentences. She had kept it folded in the back of the ledger all these months. He sat down across from her. She looked up. "The land is in debt but not in ruin," she said quietly. She looked at the letter and then at him. "You have no idea how much I needed to read those words." He thought about that. About a woman in a dry county town reading a 2-sentence letter and deciding to get on a train. "I meant the land," he said. "I know," she said. "I thought I was answering an advertisement about land." A pause. "I was answering something else." The fire was warm and the house was full of the smell of wood smoke and coffee and the particular dry sweetness of a cold autumn settling in outside. And the ledger lay open between them with a year of recovery written in Nora's clear, deliberate hand. And the letter lay beside it, small and plain and still somehow sufficient, and Caleb Morrow, who had written it in a cold kitchen on a February morning because he was not yet finished, looked at his wife across the table and understood that the ranch had not been the only thing that needed someone to see a path through it, and that some debts, the kind written not in ink but in loneliness and time, could be settled in ways he had not known to plan for, and that the East pasture rye was standing tall in his memory like a kind of proof, and that outside the window the same wind moved across the same land it always had, only now it moved across something whole.